Do you notice he calls the Old Testament law here the law of liberty? I don't know if you guys ever thought of the law being called the law of liberty. Because what he is referring to, he's not referring to the 10 commandments or the Old Testament commandments. Here, he's referring to a new type of law. Because the Old Testament commandments, the Mosaic commandments, were never called law of liberty. They were actually very restrictive if you think about it, right? It's like 600 commandments. You can eat this, you can't do this, wear this, do this. But James, keep in mind when he's writing post what? His brother's death and resurrection. And so there's a new law Jesus implemented. You guys remember what that new law was? He was asked by scribes and Pharisees, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said what? In Mark chapter 12, verse 30 to 31, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So here's what Jesus is saying. All of the Old Testament laws can be summarized with these two commandments put together. You love God and you love people, right? Or love your neighbor. That's it. And so when you understand this great commandment is called the royal law, I'm talking about this. What his brother said was a summary of all these laws in the Old Testament. And James is saying when you get a clear look at this law, the law his brother gave, the royal law that comes from King Jesus, you get a picture of freedom. Now here's what he is saying. Did you know that discipline and boundaries are actually freeing in your life? When you learn that the reason why God tells you no, don't do this, is actually for your freedom. Because if you did pursue after the things you want to do, it will actually enslave you in the process to those things. Like, think about it. Why do I tell my sons, no, you can't eat candy every 2 hours? Is it because I'm restricting their freedom, or is it because I'm actually want them to be free? I want them to be free from diabetes, disease, obesity, whatever it is, right? You see, that's the heart of God according to Jesus. All of the commandments are summarized by love. This is God's way of telling you, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. When you don't love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, you will not live a life of liberty and freedom. You'll actually live a life of addiction, enslavement to all sorts of things. When you don't love your neighbor as yourself and you just make it all about you, you actually enslave yourself to your ego and your personal desires and temptation, which goes back to the first part of James 1 of test, right? You see, there's a study that I was reading how they put this child in the middle of a field. And they told this child, go play wherever you want in the field. They didn't tell the child where the boundaries were or whatever. Just go wherever you want to explore. And they said the child went about maybe like 10 feet, around in radius and just stopped and just, after a couple hours and just stayed there. So they went back to this child, and this time they told the boundaries. So you could play all the way up to here, but past this line, don't go here. You can get hurt or whatever. Don't go past here. You could come all the way up to here, but this line, don't go here because, you can get hurt. There's a dog there, whatever, right? And they gave the boundaries. And you know what happened afterwards? The child played all the way up to the boundaries, and they had more freedom to play. What happens, why God is giving you the boundaries through the laws, is to give you freedom. You can do what you want. Just don't make it an epi-desire. So, I kind of like watching Netflix. Watch Netflix. That's fine. Okay. But don't make it an epi-desire. Don't let it be the center of your life where everything revolves. Oh, I like having wine and beer. Go ahead. Just don't lose self-control, get drunk. Right? Do you see how the boundaries actually give you freedom? Because what happens is that when we don't know the boundaries that God has given to us, we actually become more restricted to ourselves. This is what we call legalism. You know why people are legalistic? They're trying to create greater boundaries because they're afraid of going past a certain artificial boundaries they created. But when you understand the perfect law, it's the law of liberty that James said. When you love God and love people the way God defines it, it's freeing. It's freeing because you're no longer a slave to yourself. You're not afraid of, can I do this? You know what you can or cannot do. You know exactly where the parameters are. You do everything for love. And the minute it goes against love, there's your boundary. Well, should I give money or should I do this? Can I? Is it for love? Do you do it because you love God and love people? Yeah, then do it. But is it for you? Is it for some? Then don't. Right? It's the freeing aspect when you understand God's heart. And so that's the same idea with God's word. The disconnect that James is trying to show us is that either we have an attitude problem, whether it's pride, anger, and we're not really wanting to listen to God? Or it's a perspective problem that when we hear God's word, maybe the part of the reason why we're not willing to actually apply it is because we view God's word and his commandments are being restrictive to our freedom, when in reality, these are pathways to your freedom. Because when you understand and change that perspective, you'll be a lot more incentivized and motivated to actually do these commandments. Right? If somebody just told me, here, eat this carrot and kale every day for the rest of your life, I will say no, right? I will try for a week. It's like, there's no point. This is restrictive. This is horrible. But if a doctor told me, if you do this for every day for the rest of your life and you could extend your life by 5 years because you won't get a heart attack and you can spend more time with your kids and potential grandkids, and I'll be like, okay. Because now I know this same action is what? It's a pathway to future freedom. Does that make sense? That's God's word. This is a pathway to freedom. And some of us are feeling so burdened when what did Jesus say? My burden is what? Light. So if you're feeling burdened, you're not living by God's word. Oh, such a chore to serve God. Don't serve God then, because there's a disconnect there, because you are serving God with some different perspective than God's perspective. Because his perspective is that if you do what I say according to the law of love, you should be free. Should I go to church on Sunday? Come if you want. Don't come if you want. Do whatever you want. Just do things by love. Do you see the difference? Versus, if you come, you gotta come. If you don't come, hell, hell, hell. Right? It's like, okay, obviously, carrot, 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 or else you go to hell. It's not gonna really incentivize you, but carrot, carrot, carrot to give you freedom might incentivize you. Now, you guys are thinking, okay, let's move on, Andrew, to the next point. Well, James is not quite done. I mean, he likes to get in your face because he wants to make sure you really understand if you're really receiving God's word. Because he says, if you really receive God's word, it should come out in 3 areas here. First is in your self-control. Look at verse 26. If anyone thinks he is religious, does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. But what he is trying to highlight is that if you cannot control your tongue, and if you don't display self-control, not just in this area, but in all the areas of your life, it doesn't matter how much you say you are listening to God, you haven't really received God's word if it doesn't translate to control. Right? He says it's worthless. Do you see that word? Worthless is empty. In other words, if your version of Christianity doesn't transform and control your tongue, then your version of Christianity is an empty version, whatever that is. Not just in your self-control and how you speak, but it's also how you treat other people. Compassion. Look at verse 27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. So why does he highlight orphans and widows? Because these are the marginalized and most vulnerable people in that society. These are the 2 groups of people that God emphasized in the Old Testament as well. Right? He told the people who own land to leave the margins for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Because the foreigners, orphans, and widows were the people that couldn't own land during that time. So they couldn't produce their own harvest or income, and they were at the mercy of everybody else that had it. And so here's what James is saying. If your version of Christianity does not have a heart of compassion for the very people that God has a heart for compassion for, then there's a disconnect there. You're not really receiving God's word if it doesn't translate to how you treat the marginalized in society. Consecration, your holiness. Verse 27, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, James will elaborate on this in James chapter 4. But what he is introducing here is the idea that those who have truly received God's word will start to think differently from the world. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by what? The renewal of your mind, so that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. In other words, the more you receive God's word, the more your thinking should be conformed to God's word, and the more your thinking should be different from the world. So what are these 3 areas highlighting for James? It highlights the 3 aspects of us. He talks about our head, our mind, with conform your thinking not to the world, but to this is the consecration idea. He talks about our heart, which is the compassion idea. And he talks about our hands, how we live and what we do, with the control idea. In other words, how do you know if you really receive God's word? Is it translating to your head, your heart, and your hand?